Hello and welcome to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson, a podcast for those seeking the ultimate in wine, food, and travel. Each week she interviews winemakers, chefs, celebrities, and a variety of guests that shape the way we enjoy life.
Early on, somebody told me that you took your whole crew to Hawaii. It's okay.
Okay, so we, not only did we go to Hawaii for the 25th anniversary, but then they went on a cruise for the 30th anniversary, and then we went back to Hawaii for the 35th anniversary. I might be confusing them. No, we went to Cabo for the 35th, and then we went to Hawaii for the 40th, and then we just celebrated our 45th anniversary a couple years ago and went to Terranea, a resort down outside of Los Angeles, and everybody's wondering what we're going to do for the 50th, which is in 2022. We haven't determined that yet, but so every 5 years we've taken the whole bunch on a company trip to celebrate the milestone, and that's, so that Hawaii trip for the 25th anniversary became a tradition now, and so we're going to blow it out big for the 50th because that's a big milestone. So we're looking forward to that.
Your job applications may increase dramatically after this airs.
Exactly.
I take no responsibility for that. But, wow. Your personal journey. You moved from Colorado to Napa at some point to take over the business.
Yeah.
That must have been quite formidable.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, when I completed my MBA, I did my final project on Silver Oak. For your listeners who have been spreadsheeting for long enough, I built the model for the business in Lotus 123. It was before Excel existed. Your younger listeners won't know what Lotus 123 is, but which is quite funny. So that got me into a position of working with Ray and Justin sort of on, like every year I would sort of put our actual results into a couple of graphs and sort of show, different things about how the business was doing, and thinking about, we had purchased the Alexander Valley Winery very recently at that time, so how could we grow the Alexander business, what was happening with Napa, So, and then in the late 90s, Justin unfortunately started to have some health problems.
Yeah.
The Meyer family made the decision in 2000 that they wanted to sell their half of the winery, and so by this time I was very involved in the sort of business side of the winery. I was still living in Colorado, and so in 2001 we bought the Meyers half, and the Duncan family, to this day has 100% ownership of Silver Oak. I often get asked when we bought Silver Oak because, because Justin was very much the face of the winery,
of course, yeah.
People thought
very charismatic.
We bought their half, and we already owned half. So
yeah.
So then, true story. I was sitting in my office in Denver, and my dad and I worked together, and so he was down the hall, and we had owned the winery for about a year, and our general manager at the time had announced that he was going to retire. He was at retirement age, and so my dad and I and my other brothers had been talking about, who was going to be the GM, who was going to sort of run the day-to-day.
Right. And
my dad walks into my office one day in February of 2002, and he goes, that general manager thing we've been talking about at the winery? And I said, yeah. He goes, I know the perfect person to go run the winery. And I was like, oh, that's great, Dad. Who? Absolute true story. And he goes, well, I'd like you to do it. Wow. And so I said, so my wife now was advancing her medical part. She had gone on to do a dermatology fellowship at Yale.
Okay.
She was back at the University of Colorado, was like 33 years old, and was the assistant chief of medicine at the University of Colorado.
Extraordinary.
Which was a big job, and she was on this wonderful academic career path. We also had 2 small children, and she was pregnant. And I went home that night and came into the house, and I said, what would you think about moving to California? And she said, yeah, I think we could do that. So,
oh my God.
So she, so not only was it a giant change for me to come out and then be in the day-to-day here, which I had never been, and so that was, I'd spent a lot of time here, but that was a big change. And so between February and August, we found a house. We sold our house in Denver. We moved in August of 2002, and so that was my first. So I have a special place in my heart for that vintage because that was my first full vintage here. And the first thing that I did that first year was basically worked in the cellar and out in the vineyards as much as I could, because I wanted that experience and I wanted to know, what that side of the business was all about, which I hadn't, frankly, had a lot of experience. I was more on the, I hadn't done day to day. I'd never done a pump over. I'd never dug a tank. I'd never walked a vineyard block or pruned or done any of that. And so there was, or picked grapes even. So there was a lot of opportunity to experience that, especially in that first year. It was quite fun.
I bet. It sounds like you threw yourself right into it.
And then our baby boy was born out here in Napa. So we had two born in Colorado and one born here. So Jack's a Napa baby.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was that like, those first, you mentioned you obviously were very hands-on. You wanted to know every aspect of the business, which doesn't surprise me at all. But what was it like kind of stepping into this role as a vintner and realizing, the weight of it, but also how special this place is and what your dad had created? Yeah,
I think, I came in, my team who was here who still is here would tell you this, that, I came in with a lot of humility because I just, like I said before, I didn't need to come in and make my mark and sort of, I didn't really feel truly responsible and ownership until we had the fire.
2006.
So that was a giant sea change.
Yes, absolutely.
And I could talk about that a little bit. So those first few years, I think, were in hindsight were all a warm up, no pun intended, for the fire. And I think, had the fire not happened, I think things would be dramatically different today and probably not as good as they are. So, the fire ended up being a wonderful opportunity for the brand and for me and for, the winery and everything that ended up coming out of that. And do you want me to tell you a little more about that?
Absolutely. No, I was about to ask. Thank you.
Yeah. So I was at the gym in St. Helena, where we live, on the morning of February 2nd, 2006. And it's kind of like 9/11 or something. You remember where you were.
Yes.
And my wife called the front desk, and they came and got me out of the weightlifting area, and I got on the phone. I didn't have my cell phone with me or whatever. I think, God, did I have? Yeah, I had a cell phone in 2006. So anyway, I got on the phone. She said the winery's on fire, and without saying a thing, I hung up the phone, jumped in my car, and there was a fire engine water truck going down Highway 29 at about 75 miles an hour. And I jumped behind that fire truck, which is illegal, and followed it because I knew where it was going. And so I always like to say I'm one of the only people who's driven 70 miles an hour on Highway 29. And so, this is at 6:30 in the morning, 6:40 in the morning. And I pulled down the crossroad, and you could see the fire from Oakville.
I can't imagine.
No, it's terrible. So I pulled up, and I think I was the third or fourth person here, and we were trying to get propane tanks out of the way, and the thing was really getting going. And the dumpster had caught on fire, which was against the old dairy barn, and it happened to be a windy February morning, and so the wind was blowing towards the building. And so once we figured that barn was built in about 1920. We didn't know exactly when, but it was an old wood dry structure.
Yep.
And so that once it got going, I used to say I didn't know what burned to the ground meant until I saw the fire. And now, of course, in the perspective of the fires that we've had the last couple of seasons in California, it was nothing. But for us, it was a big tragedy. So we lost 117 barrels of 04 Napa. They were in the building. We lost all kinds of memorabilia that was in that building, like our first original sign, which is why that drawing is so special to me, because we didn't lose it in the fire. And it did quite a bit of damage to the winery, and so kind of that sealing moment was after the fire was over and the firefighters were gone and things had calmed down that afternoon. Several hours of a lot of intense activity. But then that afternoon, we went down to my dad's house at the end of the lane here, and we were all sitting around, and people were kind of crying, and everybody was just shocked. And as I remember, our CFO Ricky said, "What are we going to do now?" And I turned to her and I said, "We're going to rebuild the winery," without missing a beat. And everybody, the mood lightened. I think we opened a couple bottles of wine, and everybody was like, "Well, now we have a plan," And it always makes me emotional because the team was it was so amazing, such a moment. And we went right to work right then to figure out what to do, and the result of that is where we're sitting right now, And so we wanted to kind of honor what was here, but then also, bring the relevance of the modern era back. So not only did we get to reinvent our whole hospitality experience, which was an important part, but not the most important, but we reinvented the winery. And so we really built a facility here in Oakville that, after 35 years of making one wine here, we could redo it. And so we definitely had compromises in the old winery because we grew from 1,100 cases to 20,000 or maybe 18,000 in those days for the Napa. And so, all of a sudden we had a clean slate. Once we made the decision to not try and save the old building, it really was a fantastic opportunity to say, we'll turn to the winemaking team and say, what do you want? And that's what we built. That's what we ended up building here. So that, was a very defining moment for Silver Oak, and life gave us lemons and we made Cabernet. So it was, it was a good thing. And that actually, I'll just carry that a little bit further. That actually led us then to the project we just completed a year ago, which is the new winery in the Alexander Valley. Mm-hmm. Because once we rebuilt Napa, we were looking at the old, Geyserville winery where you were going to stand in line to buy large formats. And that place was fine and served us really well for 25 years. But it was also full of compromises and all kinds of issues that, if you had it to do over again, you wouldn't do it like that. And so in 2012, we bought the property in the Alexander Valley that we built the new winery on, which was just completed, like I said, a year ago. So now we have, a 10-year-old winery that'll last for another 50 to 100 years in Napa, and a 2-year-old winery in the Alexander Valley, which is making our 50-year-old brand, the wines for our 50-year-old brand. So it's all new, it's all very relevant, it's all technologically, it's the best we can possibly think of is for making our Cabernet Sauvignon. And that is a tremendous advantage to us, that we're not stuck in, the old ways. And the other thing that we built into both wineries was a lot of flexibility. Mm-hmm. So we didn't try and pigeonhole ourselves into one way of doing things because we had so much experience that we know that things change in the way that you approach winemaking and and all the technical parts of it. And so we have a lot of flexibility and ability to, and grape delivery is a wonderful example here that we've done it, 5 different ways in the different vintages. Now we kind of have a system that we like and seems to work pretty well. But just little things like that, everything makes a difference. And so that, and I think there's absolutely no question that it's impacted wine quality in an incredibly positive way. And we made pretty good wine back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, but things are better and better.
So, in truly Phoenix bird-like fashion, risen from the ashes is something so special. I've disclosed in the very beginning of the conversation that I used to hang around at your old facility in Alexander Valley and here in Napa prior to '06, and I haven't actually seen this building. I'm not proud of it, and I haven't stopped drinking the wine, but somehow, even though I'm in Napa quite frequently, this is my first time, and I have to tell people that are listening, that are fans of the brand or perhaps just discovering it, if you have an opportunity, please do come here. When I walked in, there was a group that had a reservation this morning for a tour, walked in, and spontaneously one of the gentlemen said, "Wow, That was such a visceral reaction. You can't, possibly, make it up. It's a wow winery. It's architecturally, gorgeous. I saw the big sign, LEED.
Yeah, LEED Platinum.
LEED Platinum when I walked in, but I would strongly suggest that you come and visit Silver Oak. That's all I'm going to say.
I'll just rant on that for 1 second, if I may. There's a lot of, we're sitting in my office here, so there's a lot of things about this building that are representative of the brand. For instance, the structural timber framing is all real. This is not faux. This is all real structural timber framing because
oh my God,
we wanted to sort of have the word you used before about being authentic.
Yeah.
So this is real structural timber framing. The stone on the outside of the building is all reclaimed Kansas limestone from a building that was completed in 1894.
How about that?
So that they're all hand carved bricks and then we did go through the process of LEED certifying the winery. And so this is the first winery in the world that was certified as LEED Platinum.
Wow.
And the Alexander Valley is the
Quite
second.
an honor.
And I don't believe there's any others. I know there are some in works. But there are some LEED Platinum tasting rooms.
Yeah.
I think in Virginia or something like that. But it's not the production facility. To my understanding, it's just the tasting room. And so, but this is our LEED certification in both the Alexander Valley and the Napa Valley covers the entire campus, if you will, the entire production facility. So we're very proud of that, and that's the highest level of sustainability you can achieve, and something that we're really committed to.
Again, for those that are listening, those terms are used unfortunately for marketing purposes, and again, confusion ensues. But you're the real deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about winemaking for a second. You have such an extraordinary facility, as you just described. The winemaking fundamentals, have they changed over the years, or talk a little bit about that? So,
great question. A few of the kind of milestones are that, of course, both the Napa and the Alexander used to be 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. And when Daniel Barron started as our winemaker in 1994, hired by and trained with Justin, and Daniel had quite a pedigree before coming to Silver Oak, he started to do a more traditional Bordeaux blend in the Napa. So today we blend, the Napa is typically around 80% Cabernet Sauvignon. It depends vintage to vintage. It can vary as much as 5 or 6%. But typically it's about 80% Cabernet Sauvignon, and then Merlot, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot. And in the Alexander Valley, it too was also 100% Cabernet Sauvignon until the 2011 vintage, which was a very tough, short vintage. And we had some extra Napa wine that didn't go into the Napa blend, but really suited the Alexander Valley blend. And so we blended our first little bit of Merlot. So the Alexander Valley for the last 5 years has a 2 to 3% of Merlot and Cab Franc in it, which is actually from Napa. So still well within the realm of calling it Alexander Valley, and definitely Cabernet Sauvignon. But so those are a couple of the milestones. I think the other thing that has changed is our fruit sourcing. I think we if you go back and taste some of those wines from the 80s and 90s, they're extraordinary. But today, virtually all of our fruit in the Napa Valley comes from hillside vineyards, with the exception of just a couple vineyards in St. Helena, but they're on very unique soils. And same in the Alexander Valley. And as a matter of fact, in the last 6 or 7 years, we've acquired almost 200 acres of vineyards in the Alexander Valley, including the 75 acres where we built the winery. And so as that fruit comes into production and gets into the bottle, I think that'll be some very exciting days for Silver Oak and Silver Oak drinkers going forward, because we're thrilled about the quality of these vineyards. Yeah. And all of them have been acquired with the idea of them going into the bottle. Virtually everything's needed to be replanted, so it's a process that takes really it's almost 10 years. By the time we acquire the vineyard, replant it, pick the grapes, make it into wine, and then age it and release it, it's 10 years. So you have to be pretty patient.
Absolutely.
But we know what's coming, and we know that the quality of the wines coming off of these vineyards is going to be very special.
That estate business model, I think, has so many advantages because you're in control of your viticulture as well. Is it a dedicated crew that farms all of your vineyards?
So, great question. So in the Napa Valley, we have a full-time crew who farms our vineyards, and in the Alexander Valley, we actually just recently, because we have so much to say grace over, we just couldn't do it with our own crew anymore.
Yeah.
So we work with a couple of the really, really great, custom crews up there, and so. And we've added Pinot Noir with Twomey, which we haven't even talked about Twomey yet.
Yes, we're about to.
And so, so that, so there's a lot to say grace over. So now we kind of have it's like, they say it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. So we can bring in the crew and paint the bridge and then move back out and do the next thing.
You give such great analogies. Twomey, that was actually, oddly enough, my next question. How was that born? That was your brainchild.
Well, I mean, not just mine at all. But so in 1999 we acquired a vineyard called Soda Canyon Ranch, which is just up the road from the Soda Canyon store up in the hillsides up there, and today provides about a third of the fruit that goes into the Napa blend.
Wow!
And so when we acquired the ranch, there was Merlot planted there, and Daniel Barron, who in his career actually worked at Chateau Petrus for a year. It happened to be 1982, which was quite a year. And I know at the time, I don't know if this has happened since then, but at the time, he was the first American that did a full year, what in France they call stage, at Chateau Petrus. Before they'd had some harvest interns, but nobody had ever done a whole year. So when Daniel saw this fruit, he was very excited about trying to make a wine inspired by his experience in Pomerol. And so that's how Twomey was born, was kind of out of this winemaking idea. And so we made about 700 cases the first vintage, and we were really blown away by what we produced. And so then we started to grow Twomey. We also, so that was 99, and then the next year we took a lease on a vineyard on West Side Road for Pinot Noir. Okay. So Pinot was at Twomey from the very beginning as well. We didn't release our first Pinot Noir our first vintage of Pinot wasn't until 2002, because when we took the lease, the fruit was under contract. So we had to honor that contract. And then when the contract came up was 2002, which happened to be my first vintage here. And so one of the things that I did with Daniel was we made the first vintage of Twomey Pinot Noir here in Oakville. And I would get up at 10 o'clock at night and come down and do the punch downs. I overslept one night, so if Daniel's listening to this, he'll remember that. So I always have to admit that. And Daniel did the punch down by himself, which he wasn't supposed to do. And so, so then since then, of course, Twomey has its own winery in Napa and its own winery in the Russian River Valley in Sonoma County. The Merlot is produced at the Calistoga winery, and then the Sauvignon Blanc and Pinots are all produced over in Healdsburg. So that's become a great story too. And Twomey is my grandmother's maiden name, so that's where that comes from.
Got it.
And we were originally, it was under the working title of Duncan Cellars. We just thought Duncan Cellars is such a bad name for a wine, so we moved away from that. But this year we're going to release, I think, 9 different Pinots.
Wow.
And then we make an estate bottle of Sauvignon Blanc.
Delicious, by the way.
And then, of course, our, we're still producing our Merlot, and there's some exciting things on the horizon around that not quite ready to talk about, but I will tell you in a couple of years.
No worries. Sounds like
some of the secrets in the cellar need to stay secrets. So
absolutely, and it sounds like it's very dynamic.
Yeah.
And you're still very hands-on. Punch downs? Are you still doing those?
I haven't done a punch down in a couple of vintages, I have to admit.
Okay.
But not for a lack of wanting to. But yes, I mean, this is what I do. I'm here all the time,
It's such
And,
hard work.
you know,
For
yeah,
anybody that
yeah.
attempted a punch down, you realize, physically speaking, that's very demanding.
Yeah, our crew's amazing. Yeah.
So let's talk about Merlot for a second. You released your first Merlot in 1999, and there's a movie that came out that really wasn't about wine at all, but it messed things up, didn't it?
So yeah, I mean, you know, I know the stats. So Merlot went from 14% of red wine consumed in America as a varietal to 2.4%. And the misunderstanding of that whole movie with, you know, which is of course Sideways, with
Yeah.
Miles was that, you know, Miles didn't want to drink Merlot in the book because his wife liked Merlot. So
That's right.
it had nothing to do with him not liking the wine.
And exactly. That
then in
scene
the-
got left on the cutting room floor.
And then in the final scene, you know, he's sitting in the, if you recall, he's sitting in the fast food joint, drinking his most prized bottle of wine, which is Cheval Blanc, which is in fact Merlot. So that
Exactly
was
right.
lost on the consumer, but it did, you know, it started the Pinot craze, and that's why I always make sure that everybody knows that Twomey started making Pinot well before Sideways came out, and you know, but I think we're really committed to to producing wines that people are going to enjoy, and so I think, you know, we've stayed committed to that. Interestingly, Daniel's mentor and you know, really one of the most important influences of his life is Jean-Claude Barrouet, who was the winemaker at Chateau Petrus from 1964 to 2007. So Daniel worked with Jean-Claude, you know, in 1982, which of course was an amazing Bordeaux vintage, and Daniel and Jean-Claude have remained friends forever. So in 2011, Jean-Claude was retired from everything he was doing, and Daniel asked him if he would like to consult with us on the Merlot. And so since 2011, really his first full vintage was 2012, but he came out and helped us with the 2011 blend. We have been working with Jean-Claude Barrouet as our consultant, and Jean-Claude is just an incredible man, and we've been to Bordeaux and visited Bordeaux with him. His son Olivier is the winemaker at Petrus now, and so, you know, that for Twomey, and particularly for our red wine, our single vineyard red wine, there's a lot of old world influence from really one of probably the top winemakers ever, right? I mean, Jean-Claude is
Yeah, I can't think
you know,
who might top that.
yeah.
Wow, what a tour de force behind the brand, and I know you're quite quiet about it. I certainly wasn't aware that he's consulting for you, but the fact that you're so connected, you know, to some of the, well, if not the most formidable, you know, iconic brand in the world, that's quite remarkable.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, we by no means do we express that we're making Petrus at Soda Canyon, but
No.
but it is, the wines are really good. So, you know, we're really proud of them.
Yeah, well, it's so instructive that, again, it's kind of a full circle. We started the conversation with the, you know, not necessarily using that business model and making Bordeaux in Napa, but in effect, you're kind of calling all this pieces of intel and wisdom and experience that this man has, and this collaboration has to be, you know, such value added.
Oh, it's incredible. It's incredible.
The conclusion of this interview can be found in the next podcast, already available for your download. Thanks again for tuning in to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson.